everyone. Welcome to the webinar of the Teens Project, recorded in Hungary. I'd like to welcome our speakers and the Hungarian young people who are with us today, and I'd also like to welcome our participants from abroad. This webinar is going to focus on fake news, and we are going to have three presentations today. Our first speaker is going to be Szilárd. He is a former editor of Heti Válasz, a Hungarian political weekly, and he's currently the communications manager of the Jesuit Order Hungary. We're also going to have presentations by Zita, Sisák and Katalin Prokopp. They are editors of Újváros online magazine, New City online magazine, and Katalin also teaches communications and language to higher education students. Fake news can be defined as intentionally false or misleading content that is published with the aim of spreading propaganda and misleading people. These articles do not aim to entertain, but rather to gain political influence or other benefits and to abuse people. Fear-mongering is punishable in several countries by imprisonment, including in Hungary, where it is punishable by imprisonment for up to 3 years. Now I'd like to give the floor to Szilárd. Szilárd, please deliver your presentation. And before you do so, please tell us a few words about yourself, about your career as a journalist, and about your motivation regarding this topic.
Thank you very much. I would like to start with the fact that if we put together Lilla, Lackó, Mátyás, and Lőrinc, then we could actually get Szönyi Szilárd 25 to 30 years ago, because Lilla said that she was interested in it. Lackó said that, well, I just wrote an article. Mátyás is consuming news and everything that is printed media. That's not going to avert his attention. And Lőrinc, who's studying communication, but he would also like to get hands-on experience in journalism. So that is the combination of experience that I started my career with. I wrote an article into the secondary school newspaper. I was interested in the world, but I didn't prepare to be a journalist. Actually, I had been working as a journalist for years when I didn't perceive myself as a journalist, but rather a person who wrote articles into journals and newspapers. I don't know whether you feel the difference or not. I would like to recall a piece of memory. 30 years ago, we went to Ireland with my friend, and our host took us to his house, an hour drive away, and throughout our journey I was asking all the way, and when I posed a 35th question to this person, who's actually a priest, well, he turned to me and said mockingly, "Next question, please." And obviously he was sort of making fun of me that I was just sitting there and asking questions all the way. And you may feel that the fact that if someone is a journalist, then it's not that surprising that they ask questions. And obviously, if someone has questions, it's really important to be courageous enough to pose these questions. But the story is a bit more complicated than that, because my friend, with whom I was traveling together, was silent all the way, but he still became a journalist. And I think the lesson of the story is that it's really important to be courageous enough to be able to ask, but it's also important to observe what is happening all around you, and then you can obviously write articles on those issues. And I would like to continue and round up the story of my career that actually I was writing, I started my career at Igen, which was a Catholic bi-weekly or monthly paper, but I didn't really want to become a journalist, only wanted to air my opinion on church-related issues. And obviously years gone by and I was writing articles to newspapers, and sooner or later I was found by other articles, and Magyar Nemzet, the Hungarian journal, asked me to become a journalist, and then I stopped being an English teacher and started my career as a journalist. Then I worked 17 years for Heti Válasz, and then now I am working for the communication office of the Jesuit order. I have to tell you that being a teacher and being a journalist is really similar, because what do teachers do? He tries to understand really complicated issues and tries to convey the message simply to the pupils. This is exactly what journalists are doing. He tries to understand, for example, the COVID pandemic and tries to convey the message both to laymen and both to, for example, physicians who actually are much more familiar with certain topics. And I actually could define my career somewhere in between the fields of teaching, journalism, and communication. I also think that it's really important to mention that I'm a husband and the father of 4 children, which is really important integral part of my identity. I would like to ask you to please switch on your microphone. And so I would like to tell you that there was a very significant thing that happened today in the world, and it is in every single newspaper. You have 30 seconds. I would like to ask you to find this piece of news. And while we were actually preparing for this speech, it actually was published in all articles or newspapers around the world. You can do it on your phone, on the internet, or in a shared web browser tab, whatever you'd like. Okay, I would like you to stop. This was a trick question, actually, because as far as I know, there was no significant piece of news because of which we should start looking for fake news. What I'm interested in is which internet media outlet was the one that you opened and tried to find out what that piece of news was. You can actually ask Lila, please switch on your microphone and tell me which media outlet you chose.
I wanted to check on the website of Index, but my computer couldn't load it for some reason.
Okay, it's no problem. This is perfectly enough for me. So we have Index once. Article, please. I actually had no idea where to look for it. Okay. And now that you are talking about it, what sort of media outlet would you have wanted to choose? Social media or traditional media outlets, or you didn't really start thinking about it? Okay, no problem. There is no wrong answer to this question. Thank you, Mátyás. Well, because it was said that it circulated the whole world, I opened the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Although my German is not that good, but it's good enough for me to understand what's happening in the world. Very good, thank you very much. And then Lőrinc. Well, I opened HVG, and that is where I try to find out the sensational piece of news. Okay, very good. So I'd like to sum it up. So 3 out of the 4 were traditional media outlet, which is written by journalists, which has an impress. In the impress, you can find what this product is, who's publishing it, and contact details. So these are media outlets that supposedly, so they do not contain any piece of fake news. There are 4 of us right now, so the pool is relatively small. If there were 20 or 30 of us, then obviously it would be better. I've tried this game 2 or 3 times. Many people went on social media and delved deeper into the world of social media. Obviously, it would be worth discussing many things as to which forums are that we can take seriously, which are the ones that need to be taken with a pinch of salt, and which are the ones that should not be taken seriously. Obviously, this was a playful introduction, and I wanted to make you aware of the fact that it does matter where you get your information from. Then let's jump into the midst of things and start dealing with the most interesting issues. And let's jump back to the October of 1938, into a world when I wasn't alive, not even my parents were alive, and when it wasn't that easy to take a look at Index or Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung or HVG or Facebook, for example, because either they didn't exist or simply the internet platforms didn't exist. The media was dominated by the radio. Yesterday evening, with my family, we watched the 6-3 English-Hungarian match from 1953, in England there was television, but in Hungary there wasn't television, and people were listening it through the radio. And it's really hard to think about the fact how different the world was and how different the dissemination of information was in today's world, where you can get hands on information instantly. So we are on the 30th of October 1938, and Orson Welles went into a radio studio with a group of actors into the studio of the CBS Corporation, and they performed the fictional novel of H.G. Wells, more precisely the radio play adaptation of H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds. Please nod if you have heard about H.G. Wells or read one of his novels. Well, he's not known, it's not a problem. He wrote science fiction novels, and in this particular novel of his, he envisions the fact that America is attacked by Martians, little green men who inundate the world, and the end of the world is imminent. And the actors were so convincing in their play through the radio that up until today, the media mentions this as a classical example of sparking huge chaos, that people committed a wave of suicides because the message that was conveyed through the radio, the only trustworthy media at that time, was so strong that people believed that what they heard on the radio actually happened in the world. Newspapers were published with headlines like "A tidal wave of terror sweeps across America," "Apocalypse," and all of this is known from many sources, but we also have a survey that was written by Hadley Cantrill, and up until today, this survey is cited at media trainings and communication trainings as an example of the power of the media. Though the problem with the story is that this is simply not true, because while obviously they were dealing with a piece of fake news, this very opinion poller actually found out that what journalists and communication professionals dealt with really high-sounding sentences, well, it was sort of true. Obviously, it sparked some sort of panic. Let's say tens of thousands of people lost their mind, but the fact that, say, tens of millions of people or hundreds of millions of people actually lost their minds and the world was in huge chaos was not true. The story was so much exaggerated that it turned to an absurd. So this is the example of a piece of fake news that was written on another piece of fake news. And with that, we should move on to the next topic, which is that fake news is not necessarily related to this particular issue, and it's not only present in this political era. Newspapers obviously publish something that is untrue or misunderstandings, so this fact is true for any era. Earlier in Hungary, this was mentioned as a hoax, which in Hungarian is called newspaper duck. Have you heard about it? Do you use it? Obviously, it has its origins earlier. Articles that were not controlled, the source of which were not controlled, were labeled with the non-testatum Latin phrase, and obviously at that time articles wanted to make readers aware of the fact that this article was not necessarily true, and this NT abbreviation, if pronounced, sounds enter, which means duck in German, and then it was taken into Hungarian. The second origin is a French proverb in which they say to sell half a duck, which means to trick people or to convey only half of the truth. So this is assumed to be the second origin story of this expression. In the world of journalism, there is a very important basic principle that when I, as a journalist, hear a piece of information about a piece of news, then it's not necessarily enough to get the information from a single source, because maybe one people tells me that indeed this is the truth, but they may be mistaken. They may want to sell me something that is untrue. That is, you have to confirm that piece of news from two different sources. And even in this case, those two people may be mistaken, but based on the law of big numbers, the chance of the piece of news being untrue is less probable. It's really hard to comply with this expectation in the world of journalism, but we have to try to make it. I've already alluded to the fact that in America and earlier, decades ago, the radio was a trustworthy source of media. And for example, my parents, who lived in socialism, obviously the socialist media taken people for a fool because of propaganda. But if something was actually written down and printed and was in the headlines in the newspapers, then people had a hard time believing that someone was actually trying to trick them intentionally. Obviously, the trustworthiness of the media suffered a lot today in this modern world because we are inundated by lots and lots of pieces of news. But at that time, people trusted what was said in the radio. I already refer to the internet, at which everyone can write anything which is on their mind. So people obviously perceive these facts a bit differently, and maybe we are not as naive and we do not believe everything that is written on the internet. But from another perspective, human naivety is practically eternal and bottomless. There are stories similar to the story of the Martians. In Hungary, for example, there was a Brazilian soap opera, series of soap opera, the protagonist of which was called Isaura, who was a slave, and actually people started fundraising to free this slave girl. Or there was a Hungarian series titled Among Friends. There was a man in it, Bereny Miklós, who had lung cancer and for whom people started collecting money. Obviously, this is a good story, but it wasn't necessarily true. People nowadays can spread fake news on social media, but obviously we have to state that these instances were not spreading all across the country. I would like to bring a personal example to how the human psyche works. When I was working for Magyar Nemzet, I noticed that while I was walking in the underpass, young girls and boys who seemed to be in foster care, I suppose, were selling postcards, and they said that with that money they would be supporting a charitable organization. It seemed to be a bit suspicious to me, and I found out that actually everything was fake. The organization was fake, the bank account was fake, and they simply tried to trick the money of people out. And when I was going home one day, I noticed that a lady went up to these people and she gave them 1,000 forints. And I went up to her saying that, sorry to disturb, but actually I published an article the day before about the fact that this is done by a fake organization, and she should be aware that she is giving money to a fake organization. And she was absolutely outraged that I was hurting these kind young people. Obviously, she can't justify why she gives money to a fake organization. Most probably, she simply doesn't want to be perceived as someone who's easy to be tricked, and instantly she launches a self-defense mechanism that she tries to justify her actions and override facts irrationally. The examples that I've mentioned just earlier belong to the category of urban legends. Later on in the speeches, people are going to deal with it in more detail, but it's definitely worth taking a look at Hungarian and international sites. So if something is actually published in the Hungarian media and it's suspicious to you whether it's really truth or not, then obviously there are some experts who can actually tell you whether this piece of news should be taken seriously or not. The fact-checked English expression has a similar role. For example, during the US presidential debate, oftentimes politicians tell you many things, true or not, and often in real time while broadcasting it with the help of the internet. People can actually double check every statement, every claim, and they notify you whether it's true or not. And thus, maybe politicians are sort of forced um, to take care of whether they tell a lie or not, because they will be caught red-handed during the broadcasting. And obviously, the research conducted in this area has also justified that even though you can actually shake people's belief with regard to an individual statement, the people who follow a certain politician, a politician who uses these tools on a regular basis, then simply these people will not be deterred by these facts. See, for example, the example of the old lady. If someone has really firm belief in someone who reflects my own emotions and my thoughts, then my emotions and irrational way of thinking will simply be more important than the facts themselves. So let's jump over this piece of issue because it's not that important. But the next one is even more important. Anti-Semitism in West Germany. Come on. So this was the title. And obviously in my segment and later on, it's going to be discussed what motivations, political, economic motivations do people have who want to misguide people. And now I would like to shed light on the role of Secret Service tools. Because after the Second World War in Germany, there was a wave of anti-Semitism in Germany. Obviously, the country was divided into Western and Eastern Germany. Eastern Germany was the socialist part, and West Germany was the capitalist part. And the West Germans simply didn't understand how anti-Semitism could return to a country, because at that time the country was doing soul searching, and someone actually came up with the idea that surely this must be the workings of the Eastern German secret service, but many people sort of dismissed these allegations and thought that it was only the fiction of journalists. But after the reunification of Germany and the collapse of the Eastern social German system, the documents from Eastern German archives actually were published, and these prove that the Eastern German Secret Service actually tried to make the lives of politicians in Western Germany as hard as possible. I'd like to mention a classic sociological example now. I don't know whether you've heard about the Pires people. There was actually a survey conducted in Hungary, the results of which you can see in the graphics. This was conducted on the topic of xenophobia, and people were asked how much they were afraid of Russians, Chinese, Romanian people, and, for example, the Pires people too. And you can see that 82, 87, 59, and 68% of people are afraid of the members of other nations. And later on, it was revealed that the Pires people simply don't exist. Researchers came up with the Pires people, and with that they wanted to prove that people are so much afraid of foreign people that they are afraid of a non-existent people. But we have to do justice to humanity, because if I'm asked whether I'm afraid of foreign people, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, Romanian, then I will not necessarily see a concrete nation in these cases, just for example in the case of Pires people too, but someone who's a foreigner whom I don't know, who want to bring trouble on me. So I definitely understand the case if someone is afraid of Pires people, and I wouldn't mock these people if they say that they are afraid of these people. Obviously, this is an interesting piece of phenomenon, but I would say that this only substantiates the fact that people in general are afraid of foreigners rather than their stupidity. Hello, my name is Gábor, and I study Media and Communication at the University of Amsterdam. At the university, we deal a lot about the veracity of news and pieces of information. In order for us to establish whether we should believe a piece of information or not, first, it's definitely worth contemplating what the motive of the author may be. Obviously, it's impossible and necessary to examine every piece of information, but it's worth paying attention to it. The motive of the author may vary, but I'm going to mention 6 major types now. I imagine you spend a lot of time watching videos, listening to music, reading, liking stuff, or browsing Instagram. This type of media consumption has a single purpose: to have fun. These types of information are created to entertain you. Obviously, we are constantly bombarded with messages that motivate us to buy a certain product. These informations are created to promote a certain product or service and to make as many people as possible to buy them. In recognizing the intent, the form many times helps us. For example, if a message is encoded in an advertisement, but in the world of media, oftentimes the commercial intent behind the message is really hard to recognize because it doesn't follow a traditional way of marketing. Let's just think about how celebrities go at length about how good a certain product is. When you put together a composition at school, you collect the necessary pieces of information, you argue, and you organize them logically so that the result will be convincing. This is exactly what happens when you try to persuade people of your own truth. The primary objective of this type of communication is to accept one's views and to shape our own accordingly. Another type of information is aimed at provoking us. This type of communication invokes strong emotions in us, for example, intense anger, terror, or happiness, which makes it hard for us to think clearly about the message. Oftentimes, these messages may be rooted in truth or reality, but they often contain untrue or fake information. The aim of the next group is not that easy to decipher. Try and guess what the common characteristics of the following are: CCTV footage, a government report, research results, or the footage of a storm recorded with a cell phone. Their common characteristic is to record events and to introduce certain phenomena. These are documents that actually can be used later on too. The last group, and which is the most important for us, is information, giving information. These pieces of information help you to keep track of important events around yourself in everyday life, in the field of science, technology, culture, politics, and business. The aim of the author is not to make us buy a certain product or to persuade us about their truth, but simply to inform us of a certain event. This type of information gives us the freedom to formulate our own opinion based on the information that we receive. In order to formulate an informed opinion, it is necessary to gather information from many sources. Of course, in most types of information, these motives are mixed. For example, an advertisement, beside trying to make you buy a certain product, may inform you about the features of that product, or even an entertaining video may contain knowledge that helps you to understand the world around you. Often, it is hard to decide what the aim of the author is, but if we think about it hard, we may succeed because there always is a primary objective. We should definitely find out what this is because this is the first step in finding out how to handle that piece of information.
I have been an editor and an author of the new City online magazine in Hungary for a while, actually for quite a number of years now. And first, I'd like to reflect on a previous video. In this video, if you remember, the speaker listed 6 communication goals. When somebody publishes an article or any kind of publication, they can have different communication goals. Why is it important to identify the communication goal? Well, I think it's important because it will help us decide how to relate to that particular publication. It helps us what to be careful about and how to use that particular content in the future. Several examples were mentioned as for communication goals in this video, for example, advertisement or entertainment. And what I'd like to highlight is that one publication can have several goals at a time. What we need to identify is the primary goal of that content, because everything else will be subordinated to that primary goal. Take, for example, an Instagram post, which at the end of which the publisher refers to the post as an embedded ad. Well, in that case, this post will have the primary goal of selling something, while it can also have an entertaining nature and it can also disseminate some kind of information, but still the major aim will be selling something. If we read something on coronavirus, we should have a different reading on different types of contents, depending on their goal, whether it's content for entertainment or for spreading information. If you remember, during the first wave of coronavirus, Comedy Central created entertaining contents about coronavirus to help us calm down and even have some entertainment amidst such difficult times. If we read an entertaining content, we need to bear in mind that the information in the content might not be based on factually accurate information. And naturally, the audience wouldn't expect to have factually correct information in an entertaining content. However, when we read some content which has the primary goal of disseminating information, then we require factually correct and verifiable information and facts. In connection with coronavirus, there's a vast amount of information, unverified information circling around on the internet. That's why it's important for us to know how to consume information. I remember that during the first wave of the pandemic, I read a rather striking article, Italian article. It proved to be fake news actually, but it was even reported by major Hungarian news portals. It was about an Italian priest who gave up treatment to other people. And really, this piece of fake news was reported by international news sites and major Hungarian news sites, but later on, this particular priest actually said that this was fake news about him, and it did not happen like that. I found this news report a bit strange at the beginning, therefore I verified it from original Italian sources, and I actually figured out that it was fake news. Still, we can easily fall into the trap. Okay, then everything that I want to talk about, I will have a buzzword, a keyword which I will keep repeating. This buzzword is filter. I will use this word filter in several senses. First of all, I will use it in the sense that we need to have a critical thinking when we read content. Now, what does it mean, having a critical thinking? It means that we should ask questions about everything. We read every information we get. We need to ask questions in order to verify that information. Experts actually say internationally that all the things that we are covering in this webinar should be taught at primary school. There should be a subject dedicated to these topics because young people today need to be taught how to navigate among the vast information that surrounds us. And that's why I like to encourage you to share with others everything you learn here, the things we talk about, or the recommendations we share with you today, or the websites that, for example, Szilárd recommended. And I also want to talk about, in connection with filter, a phenomenon called filter bubble. A filter bubble, as you might know, refers to the phenomenon that social media sites and other content creating sites use algorithms that keep track of our clicking history. They keep track of the contents we like and we are likely to read, and they will offer us and show us content based on that. Content creating websites use these algorithms to fight for our clicks in that sense. When in the morning I wake up and want to browse news, I will be offered articles about countries which I searched for in the previous days, or countries that I might have visited in the previous days or weeks. And I will see news content that I searched for in the previous 1 or 2 years. Once I wrote an article about interreligious dialogue in reference or in response to a terror attack in France. And when in the morning I woke up and I turned on my mobile phone, wanted to read news, the first thing that popped on my screen was a speech by President Emmanuel Macron. So I think here it's important for us to be aware and conscious of the fact that we can be manipulated through these algorithms. Now I'd like to move on to something different or something more particular about fake news. I think I won't show my PowerPoint presentation here, but I'd like to first go over some linguistic features about fake news. What are the linguistic characteristics based on which we can actually qualify information as trustworthy or not trustworthy? We can be suspicious looking at the title of any content. What are the hints we need to be look out for where we can get suspicious about the trustworthiness? Well, if the title is too sensational and contains several references like this is how this is the way to do it, something which arouses curiosity in the reader. These are telltale signs. For example, reading a title, this is what your fingerprint tells about you. This is a really attractive title, appeals to our curiosity, and attracts us to click. Everything that is overly attracting our attention, like this is how they will abduct your children. Avoid the tragedy. These are typical fake news titles. Or if you share this content, you will have your luck turned around. These are again very suspicious titles. And if you want to have a fun, have a blast, you're free to click on such content, but it will most certainly be not trustworthy true content. Very often, titles are misleading. And unfortunately, even in major news portals, they tend to use titles which are partly misleading or sensational. Now, let me share with you a personal story. A few years ago, I was in Rome at an international conference for the editors of Citta Novas from all around the world. So there were a lot of people from different continents. One of the topics we discussed was the topic of news headlines. There was a journalist among the participants who has been working for a major national um, newspaper, and once they had a news headline which shed a very negative light on the Focolara movement. This journalist is, by the way, a really credible and renowned author, and when we discussed about this topic, he said that actually this very negative news headline could appear because the person who had the right to change the news headlines was a person who was not a journalist, but some kind of a financial manager for the newspaper. For him, it was a huge dilemma at that time whether to leave the newspaper or not, because this is a real problem that very often the author has no say in what the final headlines would be for their article. This is a real existing problem, which also causes concern for major and trustworthy magazines and news portals. Szilárd talked about fact-checking services, and one of the most important such portals is Snopes. Brooke Binkowski, the managing editor of Snopes, said about news headlines, "Headlines do not only inform us, therefore I usually recommend people that if they get infuriated, annoyed, or frustrated after reading news headlines, they should double check the credibility of the source." And the second thing that I'd like to mention in connection with linguistic features is the use of pseudoscientific words. This is a really typical characteristic of fake news. They use scientific words which are normally used by experts and scientists, but which layperson would normally not use and not know. With the use of these scientific words or pseudoscientific words, the authors try to make readers believe that these are actually scientific contents and sources. They write about the topics which are of great interest for readers and the public, but which they would not be able to verify. Now, just a list, I'd like to give you a list of what to watch out for in connection with the headlines. If there's an exaggeration in the title, that's a telltale sign. If there are a lot of typos, a lot of exclamation points or question marks or spelling mistakes, that should be a warning sign. Or if something is written in capital letters, that's also very suspicious. So this is what I wanted to mention here. And actually, well, the basic idea I wanted to share with you is that the news headlines tell us a lot about whether that content is reliable, trustworthy, or not. And now I'd like to give you a methodology, which can give us several steps which we can follow when we want to weigh if a post that appears on social media can be regarded as credible and trustworthy. Well, there are several methods. This is only one of them. And this has to do something with this buzzword that I said I would keep repeating, filter. Now, filter is an acronym coined from Hungarian words. It's unfortunately not possible to translate it into English, but still I will share with you the meaning that is behind the letters of this acronym. F in Hungarian stands for source. Weigh the source. Who is the author of the article? Google it, Google the name to know if it's a real person at all, or if they are a real person, whether they can be trusted or not. Where did the article appear? Check the website. Click on the link. You can go to the website and check the contents, the mission, or the impressum. A lot of times, fake news creators manipulate by using URLs which are really similar to existing URLs. Sources. What kind of references, experts does the article refer to? Google these supposed sources. Try to find the original sources in the original language to see if the content shared can be backed up by actual data. Does the article give you any help as for the knowledge of the sources? Does it give particular sources or does it only give vague references? It also helps us to know and to weigh if it's a source to be trusted or not. The next one is date. When did the article appear? Check, if at all, there is a date on the article. Check the date if the information is still relevant, because very often an article which appeared several years ago is reposted or reappears on Facebook. It also happens that an old news reappears, resurfaces on Facebook, but if you check the date, you can see if the information is relevant or not. If it's a post from several years ago, one reason could be that originally there was no date on the article. So date is something you always need to check. The next thing is reasonableness. Is the content which is written reasonable? Are there any logical links between the ideas expressed in the article or post? Here you just have to rely on your common sense and your previous knowledge about topics. I would say from my own experience that this is what we usually start with. But for the sake of this play on words, it's a third on my list. But usually this is the first thing that raises our suspicion. When we feel that something is off, something is not logical among the ideas or the information shared. The next one is verification of facts. This is partly related to what we have covered in connection with sources. Does the article report about facts and data which can be verified from reliable sources? If the article refers to some statistical data, we should always verify and check for the facts from official databases, from research institutes databases or the official statistical offices databases. This is a good idea to do, to run such a check. Last week, I read, or actually we received an article of an author who is an expert in minority research topics, and he's a renowned author. Still, I checked the data he wrote about in this article. It regarded different statistical data with regard to minority groups in Hungary. I knew that the last national census in Hungary took place in 2011, and there are censuses in Hungary every 10 years, which means that we're going to have the next one in next year in 2021. So if you read statistical data about the makeup of the population, then the most recent data you will find will be from 2011. The verification of facts is very important all the time. Does the article tell us about real facts? Does it report real information? This is always important, not only when we want to filter out fake news, but also when we want to make sure that an article we are reading is reliable in terms of its contents. The verification of facts is also important when we ourselves write articles. To give you another example, about 1.5 months ago, Balázs Suder wrote a really interesting article that I recommend you read about Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who was elected for the second time as Prime Minister. Now, this article was dated before she was elected as Prime Minister for the second time. And the article referred to data from public opinion polls and about COVID-19. So what I did was I checked the facts against the official database of the Public Opinion Research Institute. I checked original New Zealand sources, and I also checked for data on COVID updated to the date before the appearance of the article. So I verified all the facts, and I think this is important. This is how we can see that facts and ideas written in an article are truly based in reality, or that line of thoughts and ideas that are communicated are valid and logical and reasonable. For example, how the New Zealand Prime Minister remained humane and maintained her humanity even amid such difficult circumstances. The next thing is emotions. Emotions. What kind of emotions does the article incite in us? Does it make us excited? Or does it invoke craving, fear? I would bring another concept here, prejudices. Do we have any prejudices? Because prejudices do influence what kind of emotions will be instilled in us. Our prejudices affect how we make decisions and how we feel about certain things. This is partly connected to critical thinking and how we should be aware of the things that influence and try to manipulate us. Identifying our emotions is important, and identifying our own prejudices, to identify what kind of emotions a certain article arises in us. That helps us to evaluate if a source is credible. Sometimes a certain article doesn't really evoke any special feelings or emotions in me, but I'm aware of the fact that in the wider target audience of that particular article, people will feel very strong emotions if they are not aware of their own preconceptions. The next thing is partiality. Partiality not in the context of us having prejudices, but it refers to the partiality of the author. Does the person writing the article have a bias to a political affiliation or a bias to a certain topic? How can we decide if somebody has bias or not, or is the person impartial? The author will never show us the whole picture, but only a part of reality, and the author will miss out important information. I think these are the two basic elements. These are intertwined, but these will clearly show us where we need to be careful and what we need to regard with criticism. I'm sure you have also read articles when there's a logical line of thoughts and then the conclusion is completely different. For example, there are many people who are skeptical about the existence of COVID. So you might well have an article which gives you a detailed and professional description about respirators, and in the end, they say, and well, COVID in fact doesn't even exist. And you don't understand what the whole point was, it doesn't make sense. This is an example of how you can detect partiality on the part of the author. This is the filter test that you can use to weigh information and have a critical eye on any content. To summarize, source. What do we need to check? If there's a source, who's the author, is there a link to original sources? Then we also have date. We need to check if the article is still relevant, if it's not outdated. Then reasonableness. Is it logically written? Does it sound reasonable, what they say? Does it coincide in my common sense and previous knowledge? Is it at all possible
és az
that
otthonába, hogy ő jobban
elderly
tudja azt, mint
lady
egy
who
olyan problémát,
sits
ami
in their
a
home
kutatók
would be
többen
more
vannak, mert amikor ilyen
knowledgeable
nagyon, nagyon
about
biztos
something
dolgot mond
that
valami
I actually study?
nehéz témában,
So
akkor
when somebody is very confident about saying what they are saying, and
és a
there's
többi.
not
Tehát
even
végül
an
is nem
expert,
hiszem végig, de hogy ezen érdemes
that's always a
végigmenni.
warning sign that you need to verify your facts. And we have all the rest. I don't want to go over the whole list, but these are the
Jó,
things to
én
bear
most
in
itt
mind.
lezárnám, aztán lesz majd ennek a filternek a
Okay, that's
gyakorlása
where I'd
a
like to
később egy kis
close.
időnk,
And
de
we're
most
going
átadnám a
to
szót
have
Zitának, ő fog
practice an
kezdeni.
interactive task in connection with this list, but now I'd like to hand over to Zita. I'd like to talk about the different types and categories of fake news. Of course, this is only one way of categorizing fake news. There could be different types of categorizations, since fake news does not have one strict particular definition. Fake news is used in everyday conversation to describe any kind of misleading information, and it can be of different types depending on the intent of the author. I thought Kati would give us some examples related to coronavirus, but we will elaborate on this topic, and I would like to show you several examples, but coronavirus is one good topic based on which we can go through the different categories. We can differentiate between 4 basic categories in connection with COVID-related news. Here's an article related to the coronavirus epidemic, which appeared, as you can see, on the 27th of January 2020. I'd like you to read it, and then we're going to discuss it. Coronavirus epidemic, what a coincidence! In October 2019, the Bill Gates Foundation organized a summit for the international elite where they simulated a pandemic caused by coronavirus only a few months before the actual outbreak of the pandemic. The Gates Foundation supports institutions which have obtained patents for research related to the coronavirus since 2015. A biotech firm owned by Gates has recently started developing vaccines against COVID. The current pandemic originated from a market in Wuhan, located only 30 minutes from a high-security laboratory where experiments are conducted with Ebola, SARS, and coronavirus. Allegedly an animal virus, coronavirus has spread it from humans to humans since the very beginning. Netflix premiered a new series called Pandemic in January 2020. The Chinese New Year is approaching when millions of people travel far and wide and can spread the virus. That's too much of a coincidence. I can see that now everybody has read the article, so Matyi, you can go first and tell us what you noticed in this article.
What is apparent to me, and how to put it, is it looks unprofessional. So, for example, it says coronavirus, and it is all in caps. And again, punctuation is completely amiss. So it gives me the impression that it's completely unprofessional because the punctuation is so unprofessional. So this is what I wanted to add.
It's just a minute. It's very good what you have shared, and as we can see, we can have our suspicions raised by stylistic features as well. But now I'd rather like to talk about elements related to content on the level of words, which help us find out what the primary goal of the article is. Lorenz, would you like to say something?
I only agreed with what you said, so it seems as if you have pasted, for example, a Word document there. So obviously these sentences are alluding to something and all of them are left off in the middle. I do think that it actually correlates with the fact that it seems to be so unprofessional. I mean, how it is edited
We would expect to have an elaborated thoughts when we read an article, but it really looks like just throwing around half sentences and phrases.
So, content-wise, I think we can mention that the pieces of information are quite improbable that are included, mentioning that Ebola, SARS viruses are the ones that they are being experimented with, and this is contradictory because SARS and the coronavirus are actually the same thing, so it lists things that are actually the same. So I can only mention how it is being edited. It seems really unprofessional, brief sentences that don't tell you many things. They are just put in there.
Would you like to add something? Thank you, let's go.
So, content-wise, I would like to add that this is sort of an inflammatory speech, an inflammatory text, which implies that there is Bill Gates, who's a very rich person, and that he is trying to generate huge sums with this coronavirus pandemic, which obviously, so at the beginning of the text implies that actually Bill Gates knew in advance that this was going to happen because he organized a meeting. I don't know whether it's true or not. He's the one who's working on the vaccine, and he's the one who's going to make huge money related to that. But so it tries to imply that it's a conspiracy theory, and people are going to make huge amounts of money, for example, Bill Gates and other people, and so it doesn't really finish it. It leaves it open so that people can finish it.
Thank you for sharing. You're making a really good point. What was important to notice, besides everything that you could spot based on what Kati shared, using filter or using your own experience, I think you managed to spot the most important things. A key sentence or phrase was Bill Gates. His name reappeared several times in the first 3 paragraphs, and it's a typical feature. This type of fake news is called conspiracy theory, and even the headlines suggest that something is not right here. What a coincidence. There are no coincidences. So this is what conspiracy theory is all about. This is a viewpoint according to which a major event is orchestrated by a small and powerful group of individuals who have a harmful intent in mind. And in times of crisis like the current pandemic, we are flooded with vast and unverified information, often contradictory information, and it's a situation of insecurity. In such situations, we often encounter news headlines like nothing happens by chance, nothing is what it seems to be, and a lot of people want to abuse such situations and rip off people. Let me show you another example. It is also related to the coronavirus. There's no need to read through the whole article, but just read bits and parts of it, and let us discuss typical features related to content and stylistics. 10 seconds to test to see if you have coronavirus. This is how people are informed in Canada. How can you be sure you are not infected with the new coronavirus if you do not experience symptoms for days? Experts from Taiwan give a very simple way of self-inspection that you can do every morning. Take a deep breath, hold it in for at least 10 seconds, and you will know if you are infected or not. If you do not experience any coughing, uncomfortable feelings, or a pressing sensation, then there's no fibrosis in your lungs, which means you haven't contracted the infection. This is quite a horrible article. What do you think about it? Whose advice shall we listen to? Mati, go ahead.
So what was really apparent at every location it mentions are very far away from Hungary, and no one can check what people are doing in, for example, Canada, and it mentions Asian doctors and how precise they are, and that they were actually close to the area where the virus was spreading. So it's really simple. I don't know, probably trained physicians don't say things like that. So they can't decide in 10 seconds that they have coronavirus or not.
Csak annyi, hogy ez nem tudom, mikor jelent meg
Yes,
ez a
you're
cikk,
right.
mert nagyon vicces, mert még
I'm not
amikor
sure when
iskolába
this
jártunk
article appeared, but
márciusban,
it's quite
mondta a
funny
magyar
because
tanárom, hogy
when schools were still open in March and we went to
végezzük el,
school,
hogy igyunk
one of my
sokat, meg
teacher
hogy levegőzzünk
actually
sokat, és
shared with us this similar recommendations that we should drink often and breathe in the open air. Yes, this article actually appeared in the first wave of the pandemic.
Well, to me, it's typically an example of very interesting techniques of our modern age, that we should put something out to the moonlight and it will make every disease disappear. So the fact that it's full of expressions that try to imply that the author is an expert. So, for example, fibrosis, no one really knows what that means. I have no idea what that means. So surely this is some sort of medical parlance, and that the new NCP coronavirus. So these sort of terms are in there, but obviously he's got no idea what he's talking about. Obviously there are some really complicated phrases in there, and the other half is very important. For example, to breathe and drink water. So anyone know what that means.
I see your point. I think this is a typical scam, typical method.
How to lose weight in 10 days.
Okay, well then, what could this type of fake news be? This is what we call pseudoscientific news. It doesn't refer to doctors or professional sources, experts, but puts a lot of scientific words into the article, which makes the reader feel and think that this person is really an expert in the topic. Such an article only refers to sources in a vague manner, like British scientists. Such articles are also full of exaggerations, like it's a cure for everyone, and it cures all kinds of diseases. And it's a common feature that such pseudoscientific news offer a simple explanation to complex. Here's another example for you. An article which appeared this January at a not so trustworthy news portal. It says, breaking, 7 Chinese and 3 Hungarian nationals have been identified with the coronavirus this morning. The National Public Health Center officially announced that the pandemic appeared in Hungary, and there's more to the story. Can I turn to the next page? Here's, it might not be so easily readable, but it basically says that there's been an official announcement that 7 Chinese nationals and 3 Hungarian nationals were transported to the hospital with the coronavirus. And this is the great sensational news that the epidemic appeared in Hungary. When it comes to this type of fake news, it's more difficult to detect it. They even insert a photograph which looks quite credible and trustworthy and fitting to the story. We could easily believe that it really describes a true story. And below the photo, there's an appeal. It says, please share this this article with your friends and family and warn them to take care of themselves. Let's prevent the spreading of the pandemic together. Now, this is something that you wouldn't find at a credible news portal, such kind of appeal for clicking.
So this is the case of telling you to send it to 10 people.
What I read in connection with this news is that you instantly try and check the facts. Now, what do you check? If you read something that is very possibly believable and could very well happen, it's not enough to. Well, it's the good way to go around it is, for example, to search other news portals, major news portals that are deemed reliable, because most probably important news portals would write about such event.
This was a really significant piece of news, and it was not true because actually only a week later was the first Hungarian infected person was found. So this would be a really significant piece of news, and if you don't find it on trustworthy traditional media outlets, then surely this is not true. And I think in this particular case, content-wise, you can actually filter out that it's not substantiated by anything. They say that NNM did something and also say that witnesses confirmed it, and they say that 3, 7 and 53 are numbers, and there's a photograph which is totally unrelated to the content, but there are police cars and firefighters on it, so you can see what the message is intended to be, but there's no content, no facts.
I read about the verifying of this article is that people who were in Budapest on that day instantly realized that this photo couldn't have taken on that day because the weather was completely different and the city looked in a completely different way. So very often it's a good way to check the photograph and if it could be taken about that event by looking in the surroundings, looking at the date when the photo was made. And what I already mentioned, the news headlines, which is really long and sensational and instills fear and or again the appeal to your wallet. What Machi also said, if you cannot find the news on other news portals, that's also a warning sign. There are a lot of websites where they only post just fictitious news. They don't care about what happens in the real world. They just post some fake fictitious news about something that is a topical issue because they want to have as many clicks as possible. So when the coronavirus actually appeared in Hungary, this was a really good topic to create fake news about. We also talked about checking credible sources, if they also cover the story or not, or checking dates and facts, which the article writes about, the number of dead people or their nationality, the location of the event. And if you cannot find any articles about this event based on the details you entered into your search, then you can have a solid suspicion that it's a fake news. And here I'd like to share with you some other characteristics. The fourth characteristic that can raise our suspicions is that there's a photograph in the article which was taken somewhere, but a completely new story is created around this the photograph. It's very typical of natural catastrophes, where there are fake news about some catastrophes which happened somewhere, but the photo which is posted next to the article was taken years back somewhere else. Or here's a photo. The news came as crowds of people were crowding at Aldi when the coronavirus epidemic started. But when I verified the facts, it turned out that this picture was not taken in the Netherlands, as it was suggested, but in a different country. And there was actually a huge opening sales at this store, and that's why so many people came here. So it's a real phenomenon. It happens that a picture which was taken is placed into different context, and a new and fake story is created around it. Here again, Googling keywords is a good way of checking and verifying such reports. You can see if other news portals actually verified this report or not. And Szilárd mentioned several such fact-checking websites that you can actually use for your fact verification. If you see something on Facebook or social media sites, comments might also be helpful. If there's many comments, it might not be so easy to find the relevant comments in the myriad of comments, but people often say if it's just a hoax or it's a fake news, it's a scam, and in this way we can help one another, and this is what I'd like to encourage you to do. All too often we don't warn people when we read a hoax or a scam, but it's a good idea to do so. This way we might be able to reduce the number of times people share these fake stories or scams. And what can you do if no one has yet verified a video? If you don't find any articles about the verification of a video, then you might save your screenshot and you can run an image search based on the image. When I verified that image at Aldi, I saved the picture and then I entered it, pasted it into Google image search and ran my search. I also use this strategy when I want to know where a picture comes from to make sure if it's legally okay to use it for an article, for example. Then I also use this kind of image search and check where the image or picture was originally published. There's also an extension to your browser, Revi Reverse Image Search, with which you can run a reverse image search by right-clicking the mouse. These are very useful and practical for us. And at the end, I want to talk about why it is good for us to know about these different types of fake news. I think it's important because if you are aware of the typical characteristics in terms of content and stylistic features of the most common types of fake news, this will help you to identify them much easier. It's also good because if you're aware of these characteristics, you will be able to spot fake news much faster. It helps you not to fall for your first emotions, because these fake news usually appeal to our feelings, emotions, and want to manipulate us. We very often encounter, for example, different fundraisings. There are a lot of such fundraisings for charitable causes, and all too often, for example, they want to raise money for a cancer patient with an image which was taken like 10 years ago. It's important not to fall for our emotions that we instantly share that post, but first it's a good idea to first verify if it's a real person, a real problem, and not some scam. Fortunately, in Hungary, there has been quite a number of real fundraisings like that, but those are a bit different when you read the post. There are a lot of data and address or bank account number or different articles are linked, which will navigate you to interviews which are made with the family or persons for whom the fundraising has been launched, and all those information help you to verify those facts and see that it's not a scam. Here's a picture The elephant is helping the lion cub. You can run an image search on this photo and verify if really this is the story around the picture. I brought you another picture also. Wolves show you how a well-organized society operates. This is again a picture that resurfaces from time and time again. If you run an image search based on that picture, you will again see how you can create all sorts of different stories to one and the same picture. And with such pictures, you can have many shares and reshares. These are nice pictures which affect our emotions. Now, in these two letter cases, I'm not sure if it's really a harmful thing. Sure, they want to attract as many clicks as possible, but at least these pictures want to bring out a sense of community, a sense of belonging and helping one another. So from that aspect, this can be quite positive or seem positive, but in actual fact, they want to attract many clicks to a particular portal, which will flood you with all kinds of disturbing advertisements, or you can get close to content which you do not want to actually see. This is all that I wanted to share.